who was Bill? He was, I guess, the spark, if you will. A lot of people would probably agree. He was the spark that just started so many things rolling back in the day for all the matters that we're here to discuss. So, yeah, I don't know much else about him. He was a friend, mentor. And so at that point, knowing more about the history, we're going to learn more about the history from Bill Wade. And Bill, again, going back to those early days, he's retired from the Park Service. He's instrumental in the search management development, the training. Heavily involved in NASAR in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And I think the most proud achievement was he's co-founder of the American Search Pig Association. With that, J.W. Bill Wade.
Thank you. So how do I start this? Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So once we get the PowerPoint running here, I'm going to tell you a tale, but it's not going to be a fairy tale. I mean, most of you can probably remember fairy tales, right? How did they always start out? Once upon a time. And they always ended how? They lived happily ever after, right? Well, when I came into the Park Service, I realized that there was such a thing as a ranger tale. And the ranger tale always started out, and there I was. And if you'll pardon the expletive, they always ended in, and that ain't no shit. So this is more of a ranger tale, but to be a little bit more accurate, it really is a case of being in the right place at the right time. And I'm sure most of you can remember being in the right place at the right time for something or other. I can also remember being in the wrong place at the wrong time several times, particularly with LaValla and Stoffel, because I was there with them in those cases. So anyway, this is kind of a ranger tale, but it's being in the right place at the right time. And it really starts 55 years ago when I was a ranger at Mount Rainier at Paradise. And one winter, we were, as we always did, we would sweep the parking lot at the end of Sunday to make sure that there weren't any cars there that were, shouldn't be there. And on this particular Sunday, sure enough, there was a car there. So we checked with the sign out sheet and we located the fact that this Mr. Smith, we'll call him, had signed out on Saturday morning to ski up to Camp Muir. And he was due back about 2 o'clock on Sunday. Well, it's now about 5 o'clock and he's not back yet. So we ran the license plate, called his family in Seattle to see if somehow or another he'd gotten back home some other way. He hadn't. So we started doing some investigation. One of our rangers had been at the top of the Palma Lift, a little ski area in Paradise, and remembered seeing an avalanche come off the face of Panorama Point Saturday morning, or late, almost about noon. So putting that information together, we realized that in order to get to Camp Muir, you have to make it up the face of Panorama. And the timing was about right that, he probably actually, we thought, could have actually triggered the avalanche himself, skiing up Panorama Point. So, so we figured out, okay, what are we going to do? We had heard about Bill Syrotuck. And we'd heard that he and his dogs had done some investigation or experimenting about finding people actually under snow. He would put somebody in a snow cave and then run the dogs over the top and see if they could find them. So we called Bill Syrotuck, and he and his wife, Jean, showed up about 9 o'clock that night. We put him on the thiokol, took him up to the face of Panorama Point. Sure enough, there'd been an avalanche. So he let the dogs out, and they roamed the debris about 15 minutes. But at the time, we were having a pretty significant ground blizzard. Winds were blowing about 40 miles an hour. Snow was blowing. So any scent that was coming up was being immediately dispersed real quickly. So that didn't work. So we went back down to Paradise, spent the night, took them up there the next morning, let the dogs off. 7 minutes after the dogs got off the thiokol, one of them was over pawing the snow. And sure enough, there he was, about 18 inches under the avalanche debris. Well, going back and forth in the thiokol, and that night, after we got back, I had managed to have the opportunity to spend a fair amount of time talking to Bill. So I got to know him pretty well. Fast forward now to January of 1973, and I was assigned as a training specialist at the Allbritton Training Center in Grand Canyon, named after, Horace Allbright, who was the second director of the Park Service and had a fairly legendary career in Yellowstone, feeding bears and all kinds of things. Anyway, so I went there, January 73, and my portfolio consisted of what I consider to be the typical protection ranger functions. So law enforcement, fire, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my job. A little bit later that time, I was asked to go to Carson City, Nevada, for a meeting of the National Association of State Search and Rescue Coordinators. They met every year someplace, mostly made up of people from the western states. And what we were supposed to do, I was the National Park Service rep. They wanted us to come and give them an idea of what's happening in search and rescue in the land management agencies. So I was there. There were a couple other people from Forest Service and so forth. So I got to meet Hal Foss and the other people. And there were also a few other people there. Bob Matson, whose name you might recognize, Lois McCoy, and this other character happened to be there. And so I got to know these people, right? Or at least get acquainted with them. So then, and this is the part about being in the right place at the right time. We, at that time, got our budget in October of each year. Now, that doesn't happen anymore with, what the Congress does of putting off budgets and government shutdowns and all that sort of thing. But anyway, in October of 73, I was called into the superintendent's office at Allbritton Training Center, and he said, "You have $10,000 for SAR training." That was all he said. Well, I knew from my experience that parks that had a technical rescue problem had things pretty well taken care of. They did their own training. They worked with local mountain rescue groups and volunteer groups. So I figured, we don't need to put anything on with regard to technical rescue. But I knew that for searching for lost people, it wasn't quite as well developed and as efficient and so forth. So I decided that I was going to put together a training session having to do with searching for lost people. And so I began to call on the people that I'd met, Bill Syrotuck and Lois McCoy and others, and began to design this particular training course, which I called Managing the Search Function. One of the things that kind of prompted me to do this was a fairly infamous, and I use that term correctly, infamous search that took place in Great Smoky Mountains back in, I think it was 1964? Is that what I have there? Anyway, he was lost up on the Appalachian Trail, And there were up to 1,400 people on that search, you know, at a time. Now you can kind of figure out what's going on there, right? So I thought about that, and I thought there's got to be a better way. So anyway, I began then to actually go ahead and develop this course. And by the way, Dennis still hasn't been found. You know, one theory is that the alien ship came in and snatched him, and off he went. I think maybe Rick put that one forward. I don't know. So anyway, I put this course together, and the people who were among the instructors that we did for the course that fall were Bill Syrotuck, Bob Matson, Lois was there, John Wartese, Dennis Kelly, a gentleman by the name of John Bounds from the University of Arizona in Tucson, who was a probability theory person. And there were a few participants, some of which you recognize as well. And that course, I think we had 30 people in it, mostly park rangers, but a few other outsiders. And so that was the inaugural course, and it was quite successful. So successful that Rick and others decided that they wanted to have the second course in Wenatchee, Washington, hosted by the state of Washington. So we did that in early 1975, same basic instructors and so forth, except that we brought along Ab Taylor, who in the meantime had started thinking about and using tracking and sign cutting and that sort of thing to help find lost people. And Greg McDonald was a participant in that, who later went on to become the executive director of NASAR and actually put in grants to FEMA and so forth to get the urban search and rescue program started. So then after that, publications began to emerge. You know, we had Dennis put out the Mountain Search for the Lost Victim. We had the instructor or the manual for search as an emergency. Tim Setnica put together the book Wilderness Search and Rescue. And we also saw kind of a proliferation of special resources, such as dogs of all kinds, some of which probably were a little more effective than others. And helicopters became very useful at the time. Computers were beginning to really emerge and to be able to do the probability, so forth. And things continued in the experiments and theories. And we had different things going on that we incorporated into the course at that time. I certainly understood every bit of this with the probability theory. And then this one came along, and I thought, well, I thought this maybe was a diagram of what was going on during that search in Great Smokies, the best I could do about that. So anyway, then NASARC, the National Association for Search and Rescue Coordinators, morphed into NASAR. And of course, NASAR picked the program up and promoted it and so forth. And as Rick mentioned, the American Search Pig Association got started as a subsidiary of the National Association for SAR, devoted to fun and frivolity, mirth and merriment. And then we did the third course in Grand Teton National Park in 1975 in the fall. We used the same people, and we kept some of these people over for a 2-day critique of the course, and also to begin to plan where do we go from here. And so that included, again, the same people that we had in there before, with the addition of a few others. And about that same time, through NASAR, the training, the managing the search function course sort of went international. Tony Jones from Wales took it over there. Peter Howells from England took the thing over there. Our friends from Canada began to use it. And so, you know, it pretty much began to expand significantly. But what I found from reviewing things after that, there were some key attributes of the original search and rescue course, managing the search function course, that sort of stayed in this particular thing one way or another. And so this is a list of things that I think, though some of them were improved certainly, and built into making things better, but these particular attributes of the original managing the search function course, I think, stayed with the various versions that kind of evolved after those first three courses. And the one continual thing that I think stayed was the fact that we made it a point to say search is an emergency. And so that particular tagline, I think, has made it through the years. As a federal government project, the material, of course, became available in the public sector, and NASAR and other entities started picking it up, changed the names here and there, certainly improved some things, and there were a number of different versions of it. And then NASAR seized the opportunity and was a catalyst for beginning the urban search and rescue training, which incorporated some of the same principles and ideas that the original managing the search function course included. Several of the urban search and rescue teams were developed, and now you don't have to look at any news item about a disaster that occurs somewhere, and it's probably going to include one or more of the urban SAR teams from the U.S. included. So in the 50 years since 1974, it's been modified, it's been improved, it's been computerized, it's gone international, it's spun off into other versions, so, specialized versions like a SAR planning section chief course, and of course the USAR course. But most important, it has saved countless lives. And the reason for that is that others may live. And that ain't no shit.